So, to return to our central question of Franklin and faith, who was this Franklin of Philadelphia, and what did he believe? In our mind's eye, the man seems ingenious, mischievous, and enigmatic. His journalistic, scientific, and political achievements are clear. But what have been Franklin's religion? Was he defined by his youthful embrace of deism? His longtime friendship with George Whitefield, who was the most influential evangelist of the 18th century? His work with Thomas Jefferson on the Declaration of Independence and its invocations of the Creator and of nature and nature's God? Or his solitary insistence on prayer at the convention? When you add Franklin's propensity for joking about serious matters, he becomes even more difficult to pin down. Regarding Franklin's chameleon-like religion, John Adams remarked that, quote, "The Catholics thought him almost a Catholic. The Church of England claimed him as one of them. The Presbyterians thought him half a Presbyterian, and the Friends believed him a wet Quaker." That means a Quaker who drinks. I had to look that one up myself. I think the key to understanding Franklin's ambivalent faith is the contrast between the skepticism of his adult life and the indelible imprint of his childhood Calvinism. The intense piety of his Puritan parents, I think, acted as a kind of a tether, spiritually, intellectually, restraining Franklin's skepticism. As a teenager, it's true, he abandoned his parents' Puritan beliefs. But that same traditional faith kept him from getting too far away. He would stretch his moral and doctrinal tether to the breaking point by the end of a youthful sojourn he made to London. And when he returned to Philadelphia in 1726, he resolved to conform more closely to his parents' ethical code, because he really sowed his wild oats in London, and he ended up broke and lots of problems from his London trip. So he knew he needed to have a moral code, and he steered away from extreme deism. So he wondered, could he craft a Christianity that was centered on virtue rather than on traditional doctrine, and avoid alienating his parents at the same time? This is a big part of the story. He doesn't want to alienate his parents. He doesn't want to alienate his sister. Okay? More importantly, could he, over the long term, convince the evangelical figures in his life, his sister Jane and the revivalist George Whitefield, that all was well with his soul? And he would have more success convincing his sister than George Whitefield. When he ran away from Boston as a teenager, Franklin also ran away from the city's Calvinism. But many factors, his Puritan tether, the pressure of relationships with Christian friends and family, disappointments with his own integrity, repeated illnesses, and the growing weight of political responsibility all kept him from going too deep into the dark woods of radical skepticism. Franklin, over the course of his career, explored a number of religious opinions, and even at the end of his life, he remained non-committal about all but a few points of belief. I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but this elusiveness has made Franklin susceptible to many religious interpretations. Some devout Christians, beginning with the celebrated 19th century biographer Parson Mason Weems, have found ways to mold Franklin into a faithful believer. Weems opined that, quote, Franklin's extraordinary benevolence and useful life were imbibed, even unconsciously, from the gospel. And I think there's something to this notion of Christianity's unconscious effect on Franklin. But Weems had to employ indirection here because of Franklin's repeated insistence that he doubted key points of Christian doctrine. Other Christian writers could not overlook those skeptical statements. For instance, the English Baptist minister John Foster wrote in 1818 that love of the useful was the cornerstone of Franklin's thought, and that Franklin, quote, substantially rejected Christianity. One of the most influential interpretations of Franklin's religion appeared in Max Weber's classic study, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, 1905, one of the most important sociological studies in world history. And for Weber, Franklin was a near-perfect example of how Protestantism, drained of its doctrinal particularity, fostered modern capitalism. Okay? And Franklin's The Way to Wealth, 1758, which distilled his best thoughts on frugality and industry, illustrated the spirit of capitalism, quote, in near classical purity, and simultaneously offers the advantage of being detached from all direct connection to religious belief, Weber wrote. I think there's a lot to recommend in Weber's portrait. And as an adult, Franklin, as we've seen, touted ethical responsibility, industriousness, and benevolence, even as he jettisoned Christian orthodoxy. Many recent scholars have taken Franklin at his word by describing him as a deist. That's what he said in his autobiography. I became a thorough deist. Others have called him a range of things, everything from a, quote, stone-cold atheist. That's what one scholar says about Franklin, which is ridiculous. He's not an atheist. That's a ridiculous thing to say about him. So that's one end of the spectrum, to a man who believed in the, quote, active God of the Israelites, the prophets, and the apostles. Not so sure about that one either. It's better than stone-cold atheist. But deism, I think, stands at the center of this interpretive continuum between atheism and Christian devotion. But other than indicating skepticism about traditional Christian doctrine, deism could mean many things in 18th century America and Europe. The beliefs of different deists didn't always sync up. Some said they believed in the Bible as originally written. Others doubted the Bible's reliability altogether. Some deists believed that God remained involved with life on earth. Others saw God, yes, as the cosmic watchmaker, winding up the world and then letting it run on its own. Deism meant different things to Ben Franklin over the course of his long career, too, and he didn't always explain the variant meanings. So I'm not opposed to calling Ben Franklin a deist. Indeed, I do so in my book, but deist doesn't quite capture the texture or trajectory of Ben Franklin's beliefs.